The sky was never meant to be still. But on that impossible day, everything stopped. The planets no longer circled the sun. The moon hung motionless above a silent earth, its pale light caught in an eternal pause. Somewhere in the darkness, a feather floated beside a stone, and neither fell. Gravity, the ancient heartbeat of the cosmos, had vanished. Cities froze in confusion. Airplanes hung in the sky like forgotten toys. Oceans began to lift from their basins, turning into shimmering walls of suspended water. Birds flapped their wings in vain, trapped in a weightless dream. The human mind, wired to trust the pull beneath its feet, could not comprehend what was happening. There was no falling anymore, no grounding, no direction. Only stillness, a terrifying stillness that felt infinite. In that moment, the laws that once bound galaxies together dissolved into silence. The universe, once held by an invisible force, began to drift apart like fragments of a forgotten story. The stars seemed to tremble as the great cosmic fabric, space-time itself, lost its tension. Space stretched too far, time stumbled, and motion lost its meaning. The stage upon which everything existed began to collapse, not with an explosion but with absence. A child reached out to grasp a floating droplet of water, and it hovered just beyond his touch. A mother screamed without sound as her feet left the ground, her body rising slowly toward the ceiling of her home. Above her, a ceiling lamp twisted in the air like a ghostly pendulum that had lost its clock. Across the planet, scientists watched their instruments fail, equations crumble, and reality betray its own rules. What happens when the force that defines existence itself disappears? Every heartbeat, every orbit, every breath depends on gravity's invisible embrace. Without it, there is no up, no down, no center to hold things together. The universe would become a painting without a frame, its colors bleeding endlessly into the void. Yet within this collapse lies an ancient mystery. Gravity was never fully understood, only measured, never truly known. For centuries it was seen as both a law and a language, the whisper through which the cosmos spoke to itself. Now that whisper is gone, and the silence it leaves behind echoes louder than any explosion. Imagine the Earth floating in a sea of nothing, oceans spiraling outward, clouds dispersing into infinite dust. The stars begin to drift apart, galaxies unravel like silk threads. The beauty of structure fades into the horror of disconnection. But somewhere in the midst of that unraveling, a strange question flickers. If gravity no longer works, does reality itself cease to exist, or does it merely awaken into a different form? This is the fracture in the fabric. A place where science meets the unknown, where logic trembles before mystery. A place where we ask not just what holds the universe together, but why it ever needed to be held at all. The story begins here, at the edge of existence, where everything familiar starts to drift away. It has no color, no sound, no scent, yet it shapes everything you have ever seen. Gravity is the invisible hand of the cosmos, the silent architect that built the universe without ever revealing its face. Long before humans gave it a name, gravity was already at work, carving stars out of chaos, stitching galaxies into spirals, sculpting the orbits that cradle every world. It is the unseen conductor of the cosmic symphony, the one law that turns emptiness into order. In the beginning there was only dust and darkness. From that stillness, gravity reached out, drawing fragments of matter together, whispering them into stars. Hydrogen and helium danced to its pull, collapsing into blazing spheres that lit the void. Each atom, each grain of cosmic dust, obeyed this invisible rhythm. Galaxies were born not from explosions alone, but from the patient pull of gravity's embrace, an infinite hand shaping eternity. Look around the night sky. Every glittering point of light, every orbit, every heartbeat of existence moves in perfect obedience to a force we cannot see. Planets swing around stars like dancers tethered by invisible threads. Moons circle their planets, oceans rise and fall in rhythm to the moon's pull. Gravity is the reason the Earth doesn't drift into the frozen dark, and the reason your feet know what down means. Yet, for all its power, gravity is not violent. It does not roar like thunder or burn like fire. It works in silence, soft and patient, holding the universe together with the gentlest persistence. It is both tender and merciless, a sculptor that creates order but crushes anything that resists its curve. It forges stars but also devours them, birthing black holes where even light cannot escape. This duality, creation and destruction, harmony and hunger, is the poetry of gravity itself. For centuries, humanity tried to understand this ghostly force. Aristotle believed things fell because they sought their natural place on Earth. Centuries later, Newton saw deeper. He realized gravity was not desire but law, a universal connection linking every object in the cosmos. He imagined it as an invisible string stretching from the smallest pebble to the grandest star. Einstein would later reveal that it wasn't a force at all, but a bending of reality itself, a warping of space and time that makes objects curve toward one another. But beyond every discovery lies a shadow of mystery. We can measure gravity, predict it, even manipulate its effects, yet we do not know what it truly is. Why does mass curve spacetime? Why does the universe obey this hidden rhythm at all? The equations explain the how, but never the why. It remains the soft breath of creation, the one law that feels more like a presence than a formula. Imagine, for a moment, a universe without it. Stars would scatter, galaxies would drift apart like smoke in a cold wind. The bonds that hold atoms together would still exist, but the cosmic dance would lose its rhythm. No orbits, no sunsets, no tides, only drifting chaos, a silent ballet of disconnected worlds. Gravity is not just a physical phenomenon, it is the story's thread, the reason the universe makes sense. Every falling leaf, every orbiting moon, every breath you take is a quiet echo of this hidden harmony. Gravity is the universe's way of remembering itself, of keeping its parts from forgetting where they belong. It binds everything, matter, motion, and meaning, into a single coherent whole. But if this hand were ever to let go, the balance would shatter. The galaxies would unravel, time itself would stumble, and the song of existence would fall silent. The beauty of structure would give way to the terror of freedom. This contrast, the calm order of gravity and the unimaginable chaos of its absence, is what gives the universe both its grace and its fragility. And so, we return to the question whispered through time. If gravity holds everything together, what holds gravity? What if the hand that sculpts the cosmos trembles? In that trembling, the next chapter begins. The moment when the universe's most faithful law begins to fail, and silence prepares to speak once more. It began as a tremor too faint to notice. The wind seemed lighter, the air strangely soft. A glass fell from a table, and didn't shatter. It hovered, weightless, a delicate sculpture of motion frozen midair. For a single heartbeat, humanity stared in disbelief. Then came the impossible realization. Gravity had stopped working. The world had slipped its anchor. The first minutes were chaos disguised as silence. Leaves no longer fell. Dust hung in sunlight like shimmering galaxies. People reached for their phones, their cups, their children, and found them drifting away. The human body, built to trust the pull of the ground, began to rebel. Muscles strained, stomachs twisted, inner ears screamed for balance that no longer existed. Up and down had lost their meaning. In the cities, panic bloomed. Cars slid off roads, not crashing but floating. Streets turned into slow-motion rivers of metal and glass. Skyscrapers loomed like ancient towers adrift in the sky, their shadows dissolving as the sun's rays bent unpredictably through a disoriented atmosphere. Ocean waves, freed from their bondage, rose into shimmering walls, suspended in eerie silence. Birds flapped aimlessly in the air, unable to descend, trapped in invisible glass. Above the planet, satellites tumbled like marbles through space. Without gravity's leash, the moon began to drift, its steady orbit unraveling. Tides collapsed, the ocean swelling in unpredictable directions. The Earth's molten core churned violently, its balance undone. Within hours, the planet's crust began to quake, not from tectonic stress, but from its own unmoored spin. Imagine walking outside and feeling your body detach from the ground. The grass beneath your feet no longer supports you. Your own breath begins to lift you upward. Panic turns into awe as you realize you are flying, but not through power, only through loss. Buildings rise beside you, debris orbiting like moons around your helpless body. Humanity's greatest structures, the pyramids, skyscrapers, bridges, suddenly meaningless without the weight that gave them purpose. In laboratories across the world, scientists stared in horror at their instruments. Pendulums froze, scales displayed zeros, clocks that relied on gravitational calibration failed. Equations once absolute now mocked their makers. How could the most fundamental constant, one that stitched space and time together, simply vanish? There was no explosion, no warning, only stillness. The cosmos had stopped obeying its own rules. Above the stratosphere, astronauts watched Earth transform into a slow-motion nightmare. Clouds rose instead of drifting. Rivers twisted upward like silver threads. The line between sky and land blurred, and the very shape of the planet began to warp. With no gravitational compression, Earth's sphere started to expand slightly, an invisible swelling as though the planet were taking its final breath. The emotional chaos was as profound as the physical. In that surreal calm, people wept as they floated side by side with the things they once possessed. Books, photographs, tears that no longer fell. Every symbol of human life, every object that once stayed in its place, became a reminder that place itself no longer existed. The world had lost its direction. News broadcasts became haunting confessions. Scientists tried to explain what couldn't be explained. If gravity has truly ceased, one trembling physicist whispered on live television, then the universe itself is unraveling. Across the world, temples and churches filled with silent figures, all looking upward, not in worship, but in desperate search for a sky that no longer held them. And yet, amidst the fear, there was an undeniable beauty. Cities suspended in the dawn light looked like dreams. Ocean mist drifted into the heavens, merging with clouds that no longer obeyed the horizon. Children floated hand in hand with their parents, the earth itself becoming a painting in slow, graceful motion. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. It was the end of everything humanity understood, and the beginning of a mystery far deeper. If gravity has stopped working, then reality itself is in question. The force that anchors matter, time, and meaning has vanished, leaving behind only motion without direction, existence without weight. And as the world drifts into silence, one haunting thought remains: perhaps gravity was never just a force. Perhaps it was the universe's memory, and now that memory has been erased. On a quiet afternoon in 1666, a young man sat beneath an apple tree. The air was still, the world calm after a passing storm. His name was Isaac Newton. Curious, withdrawn, his mind alive with questions no one around him dared to ask. The orchard was silent except for the gentle rustle of leaves. Then it happened, an apple fell. A small, ordinary moment, but one that would bend the future of human thought. Newton watched the apple hit the ground. He wondered why it fell straight down instead of sideways or upward. Why did all things fall toward the Earth's center? That single question opened a door into the invisible machinery of the universe. For the first time, a human mind began to glimpse the hand behind the world's motion, the force that tethered the moon to the earth and the earth to the sun. But what if that apple had never fallen? What if, in that moment, gravity had already begun to falter? If the fruit had simply hovered, refusing to obey nature's command? Newton might have reached for it, confused, his fingers trembling as it floated inches above his palm. The laws of motion, the understanding of planets, tides, and stars, none of it would have been written. The great story of physics might have ended before it began. The falling apple became a symbol of revelation, but it was more than that. It was humanity's first direct conversation with the cosmos. In that simple descent lay the truth that everything pulls on everything else. The apple and the earth, though separated by vast difference in size, shared an invisible thread. Gravity wasn't a one-way force, it was a dialogue. The apple fell because the earth called to it, and, in return, the apple called back, infinitesimally tugging on the earth itself. Newton saw a harmony in this pull, a grand cosmic order that stretched from orchard to orbit. He imagined the moon as a gigantic apple in perpetual fall, its path curving endlessly around the earth. What kept it from crashing down was motion itself, the perfect balance between falling and moving forward. Every planet, every comet, every grain of dust followed this silent choreography. The universe, to Newton, became a celestial clock, each gear driven by gravity's hand. His equations captured the world in numbers, turning mystery into logic. Force equaled mass times acceleration. The same rule that guided the apple guided the stars. Humanity stood in awe, finally able to predict the paths of worlds that had once seemed divine. Newton's revelation turned the heavens from a realm of gods into a realm of laws. And yet, behind his certainty, the mystery deepened. He could describe how gravity worked, but not why. What was this invisible thread that reached across empty space? How did the earth know the apple existed? What was this strange communication between objects separated by distance? Newton called it action at a distance, a phrase that disguised confusion with elegance. He admitted privately that he did not frame hypotheses about its nature. Even in his genius, he knew he was staring into something vast and unknowable. Now imagine, centuries later, that the force he discovered suddenly stopped working. The apple that once fell with certainty now hovers in defiance. The elegant clockwork he defined grinds to a halt. Every planet drifts, every orbit decays, and the equations collapse into silence. Newton's apple tree becomes a haunting monument to a law undone. The world without gravity is the world without Newton's revelation. A universe stripped of coherence, its balance shattered. But perhaps that apple never stopped teaching us. Its fall was more than the birth of physics. It was a symbol of the human instinct to question, to reach for meaning even when the ground shifts beneath us. Gravity was the first truth we measured, but also the first to remind us how fragile truth can be. As the modern world floats between certainty and collapse, Newton's apple becomes a ghostly image, a reminder that everything we know rests on invisible trust. If that trust breaks, if the apple refuses to fall, we return to the beginning of the story, standing beneath the same tree, staring upward at the fruit that defies reason. And once again the question echoes across time. What if the universe no longer obeys its own laws? Albert Einstein sat in silence, staring at a beam of sunlight cutting through a dusty window. He imagined riding that beam, racing alongside it through space, feeling the strange pull of time bending around him. To most people, light was simple, but to Einstein, it was the thread that could unravel reality itself. He began to see what Newton could not. Gravity was not a mysterious force reaching through space, but the shape of space itself, curved, stretched, and woven by matter and energy. In Einstein's vision, the universe was no longer a stage upon which events occurred. The stage was alive. It bent when stars were born, it trembled when planets moved, and it rippled when black holes collided. Space and time were not separate, they were fused into one continuous fabric, space-time. Every massive object distorted this fabric like a heavy sphere placed on a stretched sheet. Smaller objects, like planets and moons, did not feel a force pulling them. They simply followed the curves in the fabric. Gravity was geometry. Imagine the Earth orbiting the Sun, not because the Sun pulls it, but because the Sun's immense mass bends the cosmic fabric so deeply that Earth rolls endlessly along the curve. When an apple falls, it's not being dragged by an invisible hand, it's sliding down a dip in spacetime created by the Earth's presence. The beauty of Einstein's insight lay in its simplicity. Matter tells space how to curve and space tells matter how to move. To explain this to a world still steeped in Newton's certainty, Einstein needed imagination. He described elevators floating in space, clocks ticking at different speeds, light bending near stars. And when his predictions were proven during the 1919 solar eclipse, when starlight curved around the sun exactly as his equations foretold, humanity's perception of the universe changed forever. The cosmos was not fixed and rigid, it was soft, dynamic, alive. But Einstein's revelation carried a hidden terror. If gravity was the shape of spacetime, what happens when that shape unravels? What if the curves flatten, the fabric tears, or the geometry itself ceases to exist? Without curvature there is no orbit, no flow of time, no movement through space. The universe would become a blank sheet, flat, empty, silent. Light would travel without purpose, planets would drift without path, and existence would lose its structure. Einstein called gravity the architecture of reality. It gives dimension to experience, defines the meaning of motion and rest. When you walk, jump, or drop a stone, you are moving through the folds of this invisible design. Without it, motion itself becomes meaningless. The concepts of here and there, before and after, dissolve. He once said that imagination is more important than knowledge. And yet, even he could not imagine a cosmos without gravity, a place where spacetime loses its ability to bend. Such a universe would not just destroy physical order, it would erase the possibility of understanding itself. Time would no longer flow because time is a consequence of space's curvature. Without gravity, time freezes, not in a cinematic pause but in existential death. Einstein's equations hinted at even darker possibilities. Extreme curvature could trap light forever, creating black holes, regions where space and time fold into themselves. These were not monsters of myth, but logical outcomes of the same law that lets apples fall. The same beauty that holds stars in harmony also spawns abysses where reality collapses. Creation and destruction bound by the same curve. To picture gravity stopping is to imagine the geometry of existence flattening into nothingness. Every dip, every ripple that once guided galaxies becomes smooth, featureless, dead. No attraction, no time dilation, no cosmic dance, just endless separation. Einstein's elegant universe becomes an abandoned canvas. And yet, within that vision lies a haunting symmetry. If gravity is the shape of reality, then its disappearance is the unshaping, the return to pure potential, before form, before order. The moment gravity stops working might not only mark the end of the universe we know, but the prelude to something beyond comprehension. A new geometry, unbound by space, untouched by time. Einstein gave us more than an equation. He gave us a language to describe existence itself. But he also warned us, quietly, that understanding the shape of the universe means accepting how fragile it is. The same fabric that binds galaxies can also come undone. And somewhere, hidden behind that curved horizon of thought, lies the question no equation can answer. What happens when the fabric stops bending? Time is not a river, it is a tide, pulled and shaped by gravity. Wherever gravity bends the fabric of space, time bends with it. Near a massive star, time runs slower. Near a black hole, it almost stops. Einstein's revelation shattered humanity's most sacred assumption, that time flows evenly, like a steady heartbeat of the universe. In truth, it is elastic, alive, and utterly loyal to gravity's will. Imagine two clocks. One rests on a mountain peak, closer to the stars. The other lies deep underground, closer to the Earth's dense core. Though they look identical, their rhythms are not the same. The clock on the mountain ticks slightly faster. Its moments stretch longer, its seconds lighter. The one below ticks slower, its time compressed by the weight of the world pressing down. We do not feel it, but every heartbeat on Earth is fractionally slower than it would be in open space. Gravity, quietly and constantly, drags on the fabric of time. Now imagine a universe where gravity has vanished. The great anchor that kept time tethered to matter has dissolved. The clocks that once disagreed now fall into chaos, not faster, not slower, but meaningless. Without gravity's curves, time no longer knows how to flow. It loses direction, becomes static, a frozen ocean without current. The seconds that once carried the pulse of the cosmos have stopped breathing. The world would appear suspended, as though caught between moments. A raindrop would hang midair, light reflecting from it endlessly. The clouds above would stop drifting. The hands of every watch would freeze, not because the mechanism failed, but because time itself had nothing left to measure. Motion, memory, and change would all fade into the same stillness. To understand why, imagine gravity and time as lovers bound in eternal dance. Where one leads, the other follows. Gravity shapes space and time flows along its curves. When a star collapses, time slows to a crawl. When a black hole forms, time's steps stop altogether, locked in a silent waltz at the event horizon. If gravity stops, time loses its partner, its reason to move. The universe becomes a clock without weight, its pendulum swinging in a void, its rhythm forgotten. Even light, that fastest traveler in existence, depends on gravity's touch. When it passes near a massive body, gravity bends its path and stretches its color. Redshift, the subtle stretching of light, is time's fingerprint. Without gravity, that redshift would vanish. Light would wander endlessly in straight lines, never curving, never changing frequency. The cosmos would become visually flat, stripped of depth and perspective, a hollow illusion of brightness without distance. For living beings, the loss of gravity's time would feel like an eternal pause. A person might blink, but the blink would never complete. A word might form on the lips and remain there, unspoken, suspended between breath and silence. Our perception of cause and effect would shatter. Without the pull of time, thought itself could not proceed. Consciousness would dissolve, for awareness requires change, and change requires time. The laws of thermodynamics, the arrow that moves from order to disorder, depend on time's current. Entropy, the reason fire burns, the reason we age, needs gravity's gentle bend to exist. Without it, there is no forward or backward, no before or after. Heat would stop flowing, stars would stop dying, evolution would stop unfolding. Existence would remain, but in stasis, a universe trapped in the still frame of a cosmic photograph. Yet this stillness would not be peace. It would be suffocation. Time's flow gives meaning to motion, to birth, to death. To lose it is to lose the story. The absence of gravity would be the death of narrative itself. Every motion ever made, from the swing of a pendulum to the orbit of a galaxy, would halt. The melody of existence would hang on a single, infinite note. But there is an eerie beauty in this frozen world. Imagine drifting through it, through suspended oceans, mid-flight birds, unfallen leaves. Every molecule remains exactly where it was when time stopped. The universe becomes a crystal, flawless and unchanging, a monument to the last moment gravity held everything together. And somewhere within that stillness lies a paradox. If time has stopped, who is left to notice? Observation itself becomes impossible. Awareness, bound to time's flow, cannot exist without motion. The question of the moment would echo unanswered. Does the end of gravity mean the end of time, or was time itself only ever gravity's dream? The clock without weight continues to hang, its hands unmoving, its tick forgotten. Somewhere in the silence, the universe holds its breath. And in that breathless pause, existence waits, perhaps not for an ending, but for the faintest possibility that gravity, and with it time, might one day remember how to move again. The Earth was never meant to float. It was born in motion, bound by gravity's pull to the sun, spinning in the delicate tension between fall and flight. But now, in the aftermath of gravity's failure, the planet drifts like a lost ship unmoored from the cosmic sea. The familiar weight of the world, the feeling of down, the rhythm of tides, the curve of oceans, has vanished. The floating Earth has begun its slow, haunting journey through a reality without anchor. At first, the changes seem surreal. The oceans no longer cling to their basins. They rise, shimmering into the thin upper atmosphere, curling and coiling like colossal blue serpents. Mountain peaks pierce through drifting fogs of vaporized sea, and beneath them the continents begin to break apart. Without gravity compressing the crust, tectonic plates slide freely, reshaping coastlines in silent chaos. Cities crumble without the force that held them to the ground, their towers ascending like forgotten relics, suspended in the pale light of a distant Sunday. The air itself begins to escape. The atmosphere, once gently hugged by gravity, now drifts away into the void. Molecules of nitrogen and oxygen disperse into space, thinning the sky to glass. The blue fades to black. Clouds dissolve, leaving a hollow silence where weather once breathed. The wind, that eternal whisper of moving air, no longer stirs. Every sound grows fainter, as if the planet itself has forgotten how to speak. Oceans become weightless galaxies of water, swirling around the Earth in vast rings of vapor and droplets. Whales and fish, lifted from their element, float in confusion, their bodies turning slowly in the dim sunlight. Coral reefs fracture and rise like ghostly cities, frozen mid-bloom. The great currents that once regulated life, the Gulf Stream, the Antarctic flow, dissipate into nothingness. The heartbeat of the planet's climate stops. Humans cling to whatever they can. Without weight, every movement becomes a negotiation with chaos. A single step sends a person drifting upward, arms flailing in slow motion. Whole villages become airborne, furniture, cars, and debris forming halos around their ruins. The laws of survival have changed overnight. People tie themselves to trees, to railings, to each other, their bonds of rope replacing the bond of gravity. From orbit, the Earth looks beautiful beyond imagination, and utterly alien. The continents drift apart slowly, encased in thin halos of escaping atmosphere. Oceans glimmer like liquid mirrors, bending sunlight into strange halos that shimmer in space. The moon, no longer anchored by Earth's pull, slides away into darkness, taking the tides with it. The sun appears slightly dimmer, its grip weakened across the widening void. Inside the planet, chaos reigns. The molten core, once compressed by the weight of everything above, begins to expand. Pressure equalizes and heat escapes freely through widening cracks in the crust. Volcanoes erupt in slow motion, their fiery plumes forming elegant ribbons that spiral into the air and never fall. Lava solidifies mid-rise, painting the sky with glowing sculptures of frozen flame. The Earth's magnetic field falters, flickering and fading, no longer powered by the churning iron at its center. Radiation begins to seep in, unseen but relentless. Yet, in this unraveling there is an undeniable serenity. The floating Earth drifts through a silence so profound it feels sacred. Without the hum of atmosphere, without the rhythm of waves or the echo of thunder, the planet seems to hold its breath. It has never been this quiet. The world that once roared with storms and quakes now glides like a sleeping giant through eternity. And somewhere life persists. Small pockets of humanity, suspended in their new reality, begin to adapt. They learn to move slowly, to navigate the stillness. Children float in playgrounds like celestial dancers, their laughter echoing in the emptiness. Gardens are tethered to soil by cables, trees rooted in floating planters, their branches stretching toward no particular sky. The human instinct to endure remains unbroken, even as the rules of existence collapse. But time itself starts to warp around the drifting world. Without gravity's discipline, the planet's rotation slows, its day stretching longer, its night colder. The line between dawn and dusk blurs, and the sun hovers in the same place for what feels like eternity. The seasons freeze. Time becomes not a cycle but a shadow, an echo of what it once was. In this eerie beauty, philosophers begin to ask the forbidden question: has the Earth been freed, or lost? Without the burden of weight, life has become effortless, yet meaningless. The connection between being and belonging, between the ground and the soul, is severed. The floating Earth is both liberated and damned, caught between heaven and nothingness. And then an even deeper fear arises. The planet begins to drift not just upward but outward. With no gravitational tether to the sun, Earth starts to slide into the vast dark. The warmth that once gave birth to oceans and forests fades. Ice creeps over the remnants of continents. Humanity watches the stars grow colder, fainter, more distant. The Earth, once the cradle of life, becomes a wandering orphan of the cosmos, a silent sphere gliding through eternity, carrying the ghosts of gravity's memory. It floats not toward a destination but into the question that defines existence itself. What does a world become when it no longer knows where it belongs? Wait. It was the one thing every human took for granted. The subtle resistance of the ground beneath the feet, the comfort of falling asleep knowing the earth would hold you. Now that certainty was gone. In the wake of gravity's disappearance, humanity became adrift. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. The human weight, once a symbol of existence, had dissolved. What remained was a strange, haunting freedom. To rise, to float, to lose the boundary between the self and the sky. At first it felt like a dream. People lifted gently from the earth, their bodies moving with the grace of clouds. Fear turned into fascination as they floated over cities and mountains, laughter echoing in the strange stillness. For the first time in history, humankind experienced flight without machines, freedom without effort. There were no falls, no burdens, no pain of impact, only endless motion in every direction. Children stretched their arms, spinning in the air like living constellations. Artists called it the day humanity met the heavens. But the dream soured quickly. Without weight, the human body began to betray its design. Muscles, built to fight gravity, weakened. Bones, once strengthened by pressure, grew fragile. Hearts struggled to pump blood evenly, and inner ears lost all sense of balance. Hunger faded, sleep became restless. The body, that ancient machine shaped by Earth's pull, began to fail in its absence. Weightlessness was not liberation, it was decay. Emotionally, the shift was even more profound. For centuries, gravity had been humanity's invisible metaphor. To be grounded meant to be sane. To fall in love, to rise above failure, to lift one's spirit. Language itself was born from the experience of weight. Now those words lost their meaning. The human psyche, deprived of direction, drifted as helplessly as the body. Without down there was no up. Without fall there was no rise. Some embraced the transformation. They saw it as transcendence, the body freed from its prison, the soul untethered. They called themselves the ascended, floating in meditation, believing gravity's end was the dawn of human evolution. They spoke of a higher plane of existence, of leaving the old earth behind. But others clung to despair. Survivors tied themselves to trees, to ruins, to fragments of their collapsing world. They whispered of falling even though there was nothing left to fall toward. Families drifted apart, literally. A child could slip from a parent's grasp and continue upward, vanishing slowly into the thinning atmosphere. Entire communities disappeared into the sky, their silhouettes fading into the blackness. The tragedy was quiet but unbearable, a slow, unending separation between those who stayed and those who rose. Humanity, once bound by gravity, now scattered like dust in the wind. As days passed, the psychological toll deepened. Without a horizon, orientation became meaningless. People lost track of time, of sleep, of reality itself. The sensation of floating blurred the boundaries between body and space. Some began to feel that they were the air, that they had merged with the void. Others screamed endlessly, their minds unable to accept the loss of touch, the loss of certainty. Gravity, they realized, was not just a force, it was a promise. That there would always be something to return to. Science tried to explain, to stabilize, to restore. Engineers designed magnetic anchors and artificial grav fields powered by rotation. Massive structures spun slowly to recreate the illusion of pull, allowing small pockets of humanity to re-experience the gift of weight. Inside these sanctuaries, people wept when their feet touched the ground again. The sensation of pressure, the heaviness of being, became sacred. For the first time, humanity understood how much beauty there was in something as simple as standing still. Yet even within these fragile islands of control, fear lingered. Looking out through the transparent domes, survivors watched fragments of the old world drifting beyond reach. Entire forests, oceans of mist, and the remains of cities spinning slowly through space. The earth had become a broken mosaic of memory, its pieces scattered into infinity. And still, amid the despair, something extraordinary began to happen. Deprived of gravity, humans started to move differently, to think differently. Dance transformed into flight, architecture turned into sculpture suspended in air. Music, once grounded by rhythm, became a symphony of echoing tones, free from measure. In chaos, art was reborn. The absence of weight forced humanity to redefine beauty, not as stability but as motion without anchor. Philosophers called this age the era of suspension. They debated what it meant to exist when the idea of place vanished. Some argued that without gravity humanity had transcended its physical form. Others warned that without the pull that connects us, to the earth, to each other, meaning itself would drift away. The final truth was simple yet devastating. Humanity had mistaken weight for burden. In losing it, they discovered it was foundation. Gravity had never been the enemy of freedom, it was the definition of belonging. As night fell across the drifting world, the last of the survivors gazed at the stars, no longer from below but from within. The constellations no longer looked distant. They surrounded them, vast and unanchored. And in that moment humanity understood the full paradox of existence. To rise without falling is not to be free but to be lost. Civilization unraveled not with fire but with silence. When gravity stopped working, it was not just the laws of physics that collapsed, it was the laws of order, of meaning, of control. The world that once thrived on stability suddenly found itself in perpetual drift. The collapse of order began quietly, invisibly, like a thread pulled from a vast, intricate tapestry. Then everything came undone. In the first days, humanity tried to pretend it still had control. Governments announced emergency measures, scientists gathered in underground stations, and world leaders broadcast calm assurances from floating chambers tethered by cables. We will restore balance, they said. But there was no balance to restore. The very foundation of the world had vanished. Every system that depended on gravity, energy, transportation, agriculture, architecture, disintegrated overnight. Food no longer stayed on plates. Water refused to pour. Machines that relied on pressure and weight broke down. Power plants designed for grounded infrastructure tore apart as their components drifted apart in slow motion. Crops withered without soil to root them. Livestock floated into the air, helpless and silent. In just a few weeks, human civilization, the empire gravity had helped build, became a ghost of itself. Panic turned into despair. Without gravity, there was no shelter, no direction, no safety. People built makeshift tether colonies, tying themselves to wreckage, mountains, or abandoned skyscrapers. Entire cities became floating graveyards, drifting in clusters across the dying sky. Each group of survivors formed its own fragile world, some turning to cooperation, others to chaos. In the beginning, hope clung to reason. Scientists theorized new forms of artificial gravity, new magnetic systems that could simulate weight. They built prototypes, massive rings spinning to create centrifugal force, tiny pockets of normalcy amid the drifting ruins. But such havens were rare, and only the privileged could reach them. The rest were left to float, both literally and socially, into oblivion. Fear became currency. Some communities turned to fanaticism, preaching that the loss of gravity was divine judgment, that humanity had angered the universe by reaching too far. They built sky temples in the upper atmosphere, convinced that the closer they drifted to the heavens, the closer they came to redemption. Others, grounded in despair, believed the world had entered a simulation's failure, a cosmic error that no god could fix. Among them were those who chose rebellion over faith. The anchored, they called themselves, people who refused to accept the new lawlessness. They gathered remnants of technology, building magnetic belts and mechanical weights to keep their bodies connected to the Earth's fragments. For them, weight became identity. To float was to surrender, to remain grounded, however painfully, was to remain human. But even among the anchored, order was fragile. The absence of gravity warped not only bodies but minds. Without a true sense of direction, the human brain began to lose its ability to distinguish up from down, reality from illusion. Sleep cycles disintegrated, circadian rhythms vanished, and with them rational thought. Crime, violence, and paranoia spread like a second contagion. People turned on each other, driven mad by endless motion. Imagine trying to govern a people who no longer stand, who no longer fall, who drift between earth and sky. There were no borders, no nations, only clusters of souls bound by rope, will, or belief. Wars no longer had fronts, they had orbits. Weapons fired into nothingness. Armies drifted past one another, unable to aim, unable to fight, trapped in the absurd theater of weightless chaos. The concept of victory disappeared, replaced by survival. In this collapse, art and beauty changed form. Painters used floating pigments that never settled. Poets wrote verses that looped endlessly in holographic air. Musicians composed for silence, their melodies played on instruments that could no longer rely on sound waves traveling through stable air. Humanity began to mourn not just the loss of control, but the loss of definition, the loss of place. The environment itself mirrored the disarray. Without gravity's pull, ecosystems fragmented. Seeds drifted away before they could take root. Rivers evaporated into globes of water hanging midair. The Earth's core continued to swell, weakening the magnetic field. Cosmic radiation streamed through the thinning atmosphere, painting the skies in perpetual auroras, beautiful, deadly curtains of light. Among this chaos, one truth emerged. Gravity had never been merely a physical force. It was the foundation of meaning, the unseen covenant that told everything where to belong. Without it, morality, society, even identity began to dissolve. A thief and a saint, a ruler and a beggar, all now floated equally. Equality had come, but not through justice, through annihilation. And yet, amid the madness, a few voices remained calm. "We are witnessing not destruction," said one surviving philosopher, tethered to a crumbling observatory, "but revelation. Gravity held the world together but also imprisoned it. Now we are free, but freedom without direction is indistinguishable from despair." That paradox became the final reflection of humanity's fall. The collapse of order was not just the disintegration of civilization, it was the mirror of the human soul, stripped of its anchor, forced to confront what it truly means to exist. For centuries we believed gravity made us small, binding us to the earth. Only now, in its absence, do we see that it made us whole. As the last lights of civilization dimmed, fragments of the old world floated past one another, silent, beautiful, and doomed. Somewhere in the dark, a single paper floated between stars, its words fading into the cosmic drift. We were never meant to escape the pull. The pull was what made us human. In the silence that followed humanity's unraveling, the smallest voices began to whisper, the subatomic, the unseen, the quantum. While the great structures of the cosmos tore apart, there remained a hidden realm untouched by the chaos above. Deep beneath the level of atoms, where existence hums like a secret song, strange patterns still held their rhythm. The world may have lost gravity, but something smaller, something older, still murmured beneath the noise. These were the quantum echoes, the faint remnants of order trying to remember themselves in a universe gone weightless. Physicists who survived the collapse turned their gaze inward, beyond the scale of planets and stars, into the trembling fabric of the microscopic. Gravity might have failed at the cosmic level, but in the quantum world, particles still danced to rules that defied reason. Protons, electrons, quarks, all continued their endless vibration, as if mocking the vastness that had forgotten its own laws. Could this subatomic rhythm hold the key to restoration? Could the smallest patterns reassemble the broken whole? In hidden laboratories, floating sanctuaries tethered by nothing but hope, scientists reactivated quantum accelerators, their machines spinning silently in zero-gravity chambers. The goal was simple and terrifying: to see if gravity was truly gone or merely sleeping. They fired beams of light at atomic particles, measuring their spin, their charge, their oscillations. The results were maddening. Gravity at that scale had not disappeared completely, it flickered. It pulsed faintly like a dying heartbeat. This discovery sent a shock through the surviving world. Perhaps gravity wasn't a force that had died, but a field that had been disrupted. Some theorized it had become fragmented, disconnected from macroscopic matter yet still alive in the quantum foam. Others proposed that the universe was trying to reset itself, that what appeared as collapse was actually a phase transition, a shift to another form of physical law. Whatever the truth, it was clear: the smallest scales of existence still carried the echo of the old cosmos. To understand these echoes, one must imagine the quantum realm as an ocean of probabilities, waves that exist everywhere until observed. In this ocean, gravity's ghost lingered as ripples of curvature, faint distortions that flickered in and out of being. Some physicists described them as gravitons, particles that carried the memory of attraction. They were never directly seen, but their influence could be felt, subtle and elusive, like whispers from a vanished god. As experiments continued, new patterns emerged. In certain regions of space, objects began to drift together, slowly, faintly, as though responding to an invisible rhythm. Dust particles clumped without reason. Droplets of water curved toward one another. Even in the absence of universal gravity, something was trying to reconnect. The quantum echoes were calling out, resonating across the emptiness, hinting at a hidden structure still fighting to exist. The survivors who studied this phenomenon began to speak of the quantum heartbeat. They described it as a cosmic Morse code, a pulse between dimensions. It was weak, chaotic, but undeniably present. Some believed it was the universe's immune system, trying to heal its fractured laws. Others believed it was consciousness itself, the mind of reality reawakening from shock. One night, during an experiment, the sensors recorded something extraordinary. A gravitational fluctuation, small, localized, but real. For a fraction of a second, the instruments registered weight. Pens fell. Droplets descended. Scientists screamed in disbelief. Then, as quickly as it came, the pulse vanished. But the implications were vast. Gravity could still happen. The universe had not completely forgotten how to pull. Outside the labs, humanity clung to rumors of this discovery. For the first time since the collapse, hope felt tangible. "Gravity is dreaming," said one broadcast, carried across the fragments of the old communication network. "And we are inside its dream." The phrase became a mantra among the scattered survivors, a fragile belief that the cosmos had not abandoned them, that beneath the silence, something was still listening. Yet hope came with danger. The same fluctuations that hinted at rebirth also caused chaos. In certain regions, sudden bursts of gravity crushed anything nearby before fading again. Entire floating colonies were torn apart by invisible waves of curvature snapping back into existence for mere seconds. The survivors called them gravitational ghosts, the spasms of a dying field struggling to remember its strength. Amid these phenomena, a new philosophy was born, one that fused science and spirituality. The thinkers of the New Age called themselves the Order of the Quantum Pulse. They preached that gravity was not merely a physical force but a manifestation of unity, the universe's instinct to connect, to draw everything toward everything else. Its collapse, they said, was not punishment but separation. Its return would mark reunion. To them, each quantum echo was a word in the universe's forgotten language. In their writings, they described reality as an orchestra that had lost its conductor. Every particle still played its instrument, but out of sync, creating noise instead of harmony. The task, they believed, was not to rebuild gravity, but to retune existence, to listen closely enough to find the rhythm again. "The echo is not gone," one philosopher wrote. "It waits for consciousness to remember the sound." And so, amid the drifting ruins of a lawless cosmos, humanity's search for survival transformed into a search for meaning. The quest to restore gravity became something deeper, a quest to understand why the universe had ever chosen to connect its pieces at all. The quantum echoes continued, faint but relentless, vibrating beneath everything, reminding the scattered fragments of creation that even in disconnection, something still reached out. A whisper between atoms. A memory of pull. A promise that order, no matter how broken, never truly disappears. It only waits to be remembered. In the silent expanse of the drifting universe, where stars hung like frozen embers and planets wandered without orbit, a question began to echo among the last thinkers of humankind. If gravity had vanished, what of the invisible matter that once shaped galaxies? For generations, scientists had whispered about a mysterious force, something unseen, untouchable, yet undeniably present. They called it dark matter. And now, in a cosmos stripped bare, the mystery was no longer a question of curiosity, it was the last hope. This was the age of the dance of dark matter. Even before gravity's collapse, dark matter was an enigma. It did not shine, reflect, or absorb light. It could not be touched or seen, yet it composed most of the universe's mass. Stars, planets, and everything visible made up less than 5% of reality. The rest, the vast unseen, was this spectral substance binding galaxies together like threads of invisible silk. It was gravity's silent twin, the unseen scaffolding of creation. And now, with gravity gone, humanity began to wonder, could dark matter still be dancing? Could it be the last rhythm keeping the universe from dissolving into nothingness? In floating observatories built within the fragments of old space stations, physicists began the search. Without planetary pull, telescopes drifted freely, their lenses staring into an unmoving sea of stars. Yet through the void, subtle anomalies remained. Pockets of matter still moved together, clusters of drifting debris curving along invisible paths. Some faint order lingered in the emptiness. Something unseen was still guiding motion. The data was impossible to ignore. Where gravity had ceased, dark matter still behaved as though nothing had changed. Its invisible networks continued to weave through the cosmos, holding small galaxies and dust clouds in ghostly alignment. "It's as if," one researcher whispered, "the universe remembers the dance even after the music stopped." To visualize it, Imagine the cosmos as a vast cosmic web, filaments of dark matter stretching across billions of light-years. Where these filaments crossed, galaxies once formed, stars igniting like sparks on a net of shadow. With gravity gone, those filaments began to shimmer with a strange luminescence, bending light in patterns no one could explain. Space itself seemed haunted by the outlines of invisible structure, like veins glowing beneath translucent skin. Scientists, philosophers, and survivors alike began to speculate that dark matter was not merely passive, it was responsive. Some believed it had consciousness or at least something resembling memory. If gravity was the body of the universe, dark matter was its soul, a deeper order persisting beyond the collapse of physical law. As the studies continued, a shocking discovery emerged. In certain regions of space, dark matter's movements grew erratic, rhythmic, as if pulsing. Instruments recorded waves of density shifting through the cosmic web, rising and falling like breath. The universe, it seemed, was exhaling. These were not random fluctuations. They followed a pattern, subtle, deliberate, almost musical. One team of quantum physicists, drifting aboard the orbital research station Helios 9, captured the most compelling evidence. As they measured the distortions, they realized the oscillations formed ratios, harmonic frequencies identical to those found in atomic resonance, musical intervals that echoed the structure of matter itself. It was as though the universe was humming, softly, trying to hold itself together through the vibration of memory. But the harmony carried danger. As dark matter's waves intensified, regions of ordinary matter began to react violently. Space itself twisted, fragments of rock and ice spun into each other. Cities drifting in orbit shattered under sudden bursts of invisible force. Dark matter was no longer a passive skeleton. It had become restless, perhaps aware of the absence of its ancient partner. Without gravity to anchor it, its dance was uncontrolled, wild, desperate. The survivors began to call this phenomenon the shadow waltz. Across the cosmos, vast curtains of darkness rippled through the void, bending starlight and consuming what little remained of structure. Yet amid the destruction, beauty persisted. Radiant arcs of glowing plasma formed where dark matter brushed against normal matter, painting the blackness with luminous scars. It was as if creation and annihilation were performing their final duet. The philosophers who still chronicled the end of days spoke of this with awe. Perhaps, one wrote, dark matter was never meant to be understood. Perhaps it was the hidden mind of the universe, dreaming itself into balance. Gravity was its voice, light was its memory. Without the voice, the dream grows restless. But in the ruins of science, a new hope flickered. The Helios 9 team noticed something extraordinary. Where dark matter gathered, small gravitational fields began to reappear. Weak at first, inconsistent but real. In those clusters, dust and gas began to spiral again, mimicking the old motions of planets. Gravity was not returning fully, but echoing faintly through the dance of dark matter. It became clear then, dark matter might be holding the blueprint of the cosmos, the record of how everything once was. Like a symphony without its conductor, the orchestra still remembered the music. The universe's structure was not entirely gone, it was just waiting to be reawakened. Still, there was an unshakable fear. If dark matter could preserve gravity's memory, it could also rewrite it. Some scientists warned that this new gravitational rhythm was different, unpredictable. The constants had shifted, the pull was uneven. If it grew stronger, it could collapse the cosmos inward, pulling everything into a single point of unimaginable density. The dance could end in either rebirth or oblivion. In the midst of uncertainty, one truth emerged with haunting clarity. Gravity may have sculpted the visible world, but dark matter was its invisible conscience. And though humanity had once ignored it, this unseen sea surrounding every atom, it was now the last architect of existence. As the survivors watched the glowing filaments stretch and shimmer through the eternal night, they realized that the end of gravity had not silenced the universe. The music still played, quieter, stranger, but alive. The dance of dark matter continued, weaving its ghostly steps through the ruins of creation, carrying within its rhythm the faintest promise that the cosmos had not forgotten how to hold itself together. The void was never truly empty. Between the galaxies, in the endless stretches of nothingness, space itself shimmered with unseen potential. But now, after gravity's death, it had become something else entirely. The stars had stopped moving, the planets drifted apart, and what remained was the endless in-between, the void between everything. It was not silence as humans once knew it. It was the kind of silence that swallowed even the idea of sound, a vast, unending presence of absence. In this void, the universe seemed to remember its own loneliness. The glowing filaments of dark matter that once connected galaxies began to dim, their faint luminescence fading into black. The cosmic web, the architecture of creation, unraveled strand by strand. Where galaxies once spun in elegant spirals, only cold light remained, diffused and lifeless, like the dying embers of forgotten stars. For eons, gravity had filled this emptiness with meaning. It pulled dust into planets, chaos into form, silence into song. Without it, the void reclaimed dominion. The distances between stars grew infinite, stretching beyond comprehension. The nearest light was now centuries away, unreachable, untouchable. The universe was expanding still but without order, each particle wandering alone, exiled from every other. To the few remaining observers, astronomers adrift in isolated habitats, the void became both a mirror and a mystery. They looked into it and saw the reflection of existence itself, an expanse where everything had once been connected but was now condemned to solitude. This, one wrote in his final transmission, is what the universe looks like when it forgets itself. Yet the void was not simply nothingness, it was paradox. In the absence of gravity's pull, quantum fields still vibrated faintly, generating ripples of virtual particles that appeared and vanished in microseconds. It was as though reality refused to die completely. Even here, in the absolute quiet, something persisted, the potential for something to be. The void was not dead, it was waiting. Philosophers among the survivors began to speak of it as a consciousness, an infinite stillness that had been there before creation. They called it the between. It was not malevolent nor benevolent, merely patient. It watched. It contained everything that was, everything that would be, and everything that could never be. It was the background hum of existence, stripped of story and shape. In ancient myths, the void had always been the first and final state, the chaos before the cosmos, the silence after the song. Scientists now faced the eerie realization that those myths might have been less metaphor and more memory. Gravity had only ever been a temporary rebellion against this nothingness, a spark of structure in an infinite sea of entropy. Now that spark had burned out. And yet, as the void deepened, strange lights began to flicker at its edges. Instruments detected faint, spontaneous bursts of radiation, tiny flares where energy gathered and then disappeared. They came in patterns, almost rhythmic, as though the void itself was breathing. The surviving astrophysicists debated endlessly. Were these the remnants of dying stars, or was the universe itself trying to awaken? Some claimed to hear a faint vibration, not through sound but through feeling, a low, omnipresent hum that resonated in their bones. It had no source, no frequency, no beginning. It was simply there. They called it the echo of existence. A subtle reminder that creation and destruction were never opposites, but partners in an endless dance. The void was not a grave, it was the womb that had birthed everything once before. From the vantage of human emotion, the void became terrifying, a horizon without end, a reminder that connection was not guaranteed. Floating alone through its black expanse, the last survivors experienced a new kind of fear, not of death but of infinite continuity. To exist forever without contact, without weight, without meaning, this was the true horror of the cosmos. Yet in that terror lay beauty. The void was a canvas without boundaries. Every photon that still moved, every particle that still spun, painted streaks of light across its surface. The emptiness shimmered with faint, ghostly color, like brushstrokes on an invisible painting. It was as if the universe itself had become an artist, working not in substance, but in the pure suggestion of form. Somewhere within that endless black, remnants of planets continued to drift, crystalline fragments of mountains, oceans frozen into perfect spheres, silent relics of a world that once had song. These fragments caught the dim light of dead stars, glowing softly as they passed through the infinite. It was as though memory itself refused to fade. One lone philosopher, orbiting in his tiny habitat, recorded his final reflection before communication ceased. Perhaps the void is not punishment but return. We came from this silence and to it we go. The universe expands not because it seeks distance, but because it remembers freedom. Gravity held us in love, now the void holds us in truth. With that, his signal vanished into the Black Sea, where even light seemed reluctant to travel. And so, the void remained, the eternal stillness between every beginning and every end. It was terrifying in its enormity, but also strangely peaceful. It was the great equalizer, where stars and souls dissolved alike into pure potential. No wars, no sorrow, no memory, only the quiet pulse of the cosmos breathing without witness. In the void between everything, existence had reached its most delicate balance, the point where nothing and everything became the same. And from that balance, somewhere deep in the fabric of darkness, the faintest flicker of possibility stirred, as if the universe in its boundless emptiness was dreaming once again of gravity. Time was never meant to exist alone. It was gravity's shadow, the rhythm born from curvature, the silent consequence of space being bent. But now, in the aftermath of gravity's disappearance, that shadow has fractured. The cosmic clock that once ticked with perfect precision has begun to tear itself apart. When time tears, reality does not simply end, it unravels. It forgets. It folds back upon itself like a mirror trying to remember its reflection. At first, the tearing was invisible. The universe still appeared to move, though sluggishly, like a film reel slowing toward a stop. But the laws beneath that motion had already begun to decay. Time no longer flowed evenly. In some regions of space, it ran faster, stars aged centuries and seconds, flaring and fading like dying candles. In others, it crawled or froze altogether, motionless fragments of light suspended mid-journey, trapped between what was and what would never be. The survivors aboard the orbital habitats noticed it first. Communication between colonies became distorted, not just by distance but by chronology. A message sent at 1 hour might arrive years before it was sent, or centuries after. Whole conversations fell out of sync, lost in loops of time. Scientists watched their instruments report events that had not yet occurred. They began to call it temporal shearing, the slow shredding of continuity itself. Imagine a tapestry of silk stretched across eternity. Gravity had once kept that tapestry taut, allowing time to flow as a smooth thread. But with gravity gone, the fabric slackened, then ripped. Each tier birthed a separate pocket of chronology, fragments of reality no longer synchronized with the whole. Planets aged in isolation. Stars burned in reverse. Even thought began to fracture, as consciousness itself relies on the forward motion of cause and effect. For those still alive, the experience was madness. In one corner of the sky, a supernova exploded and collapsed back into its star repeatedly, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. In another, galaxies flickered between past and future frames, appearing ancient one moment and newborn the next. Astronomers stared into telescopes and saw the same stars dying and being reborn over and over again, trapped in temporal eddies. The psychological effects were devastating. People found themselves reliving moments, caught in loops of their own making. Some saw loved ones appear alive again, only to vanish, erased by the next fluctuation. Others drifted into time pockets where seconds stretched into days. A single conversation might last a lifetime or never happen at all. The concept of now lost meaning. Time was no longer a river, it was a shattered mirror, every fragment reflecting a different moment. And yet, beneath the terror, there was awe. Humanity had never truly understood how fragile time was, how utterly dependent it was on the geometry of space. Einstein's equations had hinted at it. Time bends, time stretches, time slows. But no one imagined it could tear. Now that theory had become a living nightmare. The cosmos itself was bleeding chronology, spilling seconds into the void like sand from a broken hourglass. As time fractured, so did memory. The last historians, orbiting in floating data vaults, tried desperately to preserve the story of humanity. But as they wrote, their words changed. Sentences reordered themselves, entire passages vanished before their eyes. Some documents recorded events that never occurred, or premonitions of things yet to happen. History, one archivist wrote in despair, has lost its own timeline. In regions near the remnants of black holes, those ancient monuments to gravity, time behaved most strangely of all. The gravitational singularities, once defined by their infinite curvature, now flickered between existence and absence. Around them, spacetime folded inward, then reversed like breath inhaled and exhaled. These were the temporal scars, zones where time collapsed upon itself so violently that it began to echo. Scientists called the phenomenon chronological feedback. To an observer, it looked like reality replaying fragments of itself, ghosts of events looping endlessly, their origins erased. One fragment became famous among the remaining colonies, a looped transmission of a woman standing in a field of floating debris, whispering a single phrase, "It's still happening." The message repeated across frequencies, across centuries, even across dimensions of warped space. No one knew when or where she had spoken it. Perhaps she never had. Perhaps she always would. Eventually, the survivors began to realize the tearing of time was more than a symptom. It was the next phase of the universe's transformation. Gravity had held space together. Without it, the fabric had begun to lose cohesion. But time, unlike space, could not stretch infinitely. Fought back. The tearing was not just decay, it was an attempt to correct imbalance. The universe was trying, in its own way, to repair itself by collapsing the fractured timelines back into one. And in that effort, new phenomena began to emerge. Across the void, faint ripples appeared, waves of restoration sweeping through the chaos. In regions where these waves passed, moments realigned and time began to flow smoothly again, if only briefly. The survivors called them temporal tides. They were unpredictable, but they brought glimpses of stability, seconds of clarity in which clocks ticked normally, voices matched their echoes, and motion once again made sense. But these tides came with a cost. Each time one passed, it consumed fragments of nearby reality, smoothing time by erasing space. Entire habitats disappeared in exchange for a few seconds of temporal order. The universe was sacrificing matter for meaning, collapsing existence into chronology. The more it tried to fix itself, the smaller it became. The final recordings from the last surviving time researchers described the inevitable end. When the last tide passes, one wrote, there will be no more difference between past and future. Everything that ever was or will be will coexist in a single instant. Time will no longer tear, because it will no longer move. In the distance, the stars flickered one last time, their light crossing multiple ages in a single flash. Then, one by one, they went dark, not extinguished but folded into stillness. The ticking of the cosmos ceased. And yet, in that infinite pause, there was a strange serenity. The tearing had ended. The chaos had calmed. Time had returned to its origin. A single eternal moment where everything exists, everywhere, forever. The universe was not destroyed. It had simply stopped unfolding. When time tears, the illusion of sequence dies, but the truth remains. All moments were never separate. They were one, always one. And in the quiet unity of that realization, existence finally remembers what gravity once whispered through every falling apple, every orbiting star, every beating heart. Nothing is ever truly lost. The darkness was absolute, but not final. In the wake of the universe's unraveling, when time no longer flowed and gravity's song had faded to silence, something began to stir. It was faint at first, like the first vibration of a string in an infinite void. Scientists, philosophers, and the last surviving minds called it the rebirth hypothesis. The idea that destruction was not the end of the cosmic story, but the beginning of a new one. For even in the ashes of collapsed law and broken symmetry, the universe seemed to remember the act of creation. To understand the possibility of rebirth, one must remember that the universe has died before. Cosmologists once theorized that the cosmos was cyclical, a sequence of expansions and contractions, births and deaths known as the Big Bounce. In this model, every ending is merely a reset, every collapse a preparation for another beginning. The end of gravity, they now believed, was not a failure but a transition, a shedding of old laws to make room for new ones. In the stillness after time's collapse, remnants of dark matter and quantum fields continued to vibrate faintly. These were not random movements. They followed mathematical harmonies, fractal rhythms repeating across unimaginable scales. It was as though the universe, stripped of its form, still carried a heartbeat, the memory of what it once was and the instinct to live again. Within the remnants of scientific outposts drifting through the void, survivors began to record strange phenomena. Subatomic particles appeared spontaneously out of nothing, forming brief flashes of light before vanishing. Energy fields rippled across the darkness like ripples in invisible water. They were faint, irregular, but unmistakably creative. From the nothingness, new patterns were emerging, symmetrical, ordered, purposeful. One astrophysicist aboard the last functioning research station described it as the void dreaming. It's like watching the universe rehearse itself, she wrote. Not recreating the old but composing something new, different constants, different laws, a different kind of time. The idea was electrifying. If gravity could collapse, it could also return, but not necessarily as the same force. The rebirth hypothesis proposed that the universe was recalibrating, rebalancing its equations, rediscovering its architecture through chaos. At first, the survivors argued, how could new laws emerge when the old ones had failed? If time had stopped, what could possibly evolve? But the evidence grew undeniable. Quantum fields, those ever-present seas of energy that underlie existence, began to swell with fluctuations. Tiny, transient zones of negative and positive energy collided, forming bursts of creation. Some of these regions lasted longer than others, growing stable, radiating warmth. For the first time since the collapse, temperature existed again. And with heat came light. Not the faint, dying light of old stars, but the raw brilliance of birth, the kind that once ignited the first suns. Small pockets of spacetime began to bloom, like sparks igniting across the infinite darkness. Each pocket followed its own rhythm, its own geometry, its own laws. Some expanded rapidly, forming miniature universes that winked out moments later. Others stabilized, growing steadily, nurtured by invisible forces no one could yet explain. The question was no longer if the universe could be reborn, but how many times it already had been. Perhaps this was not the first collapse, nor the first awakening. The death of gravity might have been just one beat in an eternal pulse, a cycle of remembering and forgetting, destruction and renewal. The philosophers who still wrote by the dim glow of their stations saw poetry in this pattern. They said the cosmos was like a living mind that dreamed itself into being over and over again, each version learning, refining, evolving. Every universe, one wrote, is a thought in the mind of the infinite. When gravity stops, it is not death, it is the pause between breaths. But the new creation would not be gentle. In regions where energy condensed, violent flashes tore through the void. Tremendous forces emerged, forces not identical to the gravity that once shaped stars but similar in purpose. These protogravitational fields bent space in fresh configurations, creating strange geometries that defied comprehension. Some formed closed loops of space, spherical pockets where time could flow again, albeit differently. Inside one such loop, observers recorded the first true miracle: matter forming spontaneously from pure energy. Hydrogen, helium, the simplest elements of all, born again from the cosmic dark. The researchers wept. The universe has started over, one whispered. We're watching Genesis itself. Still, this rebirth was not without cost. As new regions of spacetime expanded, they consumed what remained of the old universe. The dying fragments of galaxies were drawn into the newborn structures, their matter recycled into new beginnings. The universe was devouring its past to create its future. In that paradox lay both horror and grace, the realization that everything beautiful was built on the ashes of what came before. For those few who survived to witness it, hope returned, not as comfort but as awe. They watched as the first newborn suns ignited across the void, their light trembling through the fabric of newly forming space. Each sun was smaller, gentler, but more precise, more stable, as if the cosmos itself had learned from its last iteration. Gravity, or something like it, had returned reimagined. It no longer dragged objects together by force. Instead, it wove them into harmony, like threads in a self-correcting pattern. And so the cycle began anew. The darkness receded. The void, once infinite and silent, now thrummed with quiet creation. Light reappeared, not as a conqueror of darkness but as its partner. The contrast between the two gave shape to meaning once more. The rebirth hypothesis became the ultimate revelation, that endings are illusions and destruction is merely the soil in which new laws grow. The universe, it seemed, was incapable of true death. Every collapse was an inhale before another expansion, every silence a prelude to another song. Perhaps this is what gravity had always been, a memory of connection, the universe's own longing to bring itself back together. When it stopped working, the cosmos did not die, it simply remembered how to begin again. And somewhere deep within the newborn light, a voice older than stars whispered the simplest truth of all: nothing ends, everything transforms. The philosophers of the new dawn called themselves the architects of reality. They were not builders of stone or metal, but of meaning. In the quiet glow of rebirth, after gravity had returned in strange and gentle forms, they became humanity's new thinkers, the interpreters of existence. The universe had begun to reassemble itself, not as it once was but as something new. Laws were different now, subtler, more fluid. The cosmos no longer demanded obedience, it invited participation. Humanity, reborn alongside it, began to wonder whether consciousness itself was the missing element in the equation of creation. The first architects were survivors, scientists, poets, monks and wanderers, who gathered aboard the drifting station Aurora, the last refuge orbiting the edge of a young and glowing nebula. From that vantage they witnessed something miraculous, space folding and unfolding in slow waves as if the universe were breathing again. Stars ignited not in explosions, but in graceful blossoms of light. Planets began to form in spirals that resembled living geometry, their orbits shimmering with a rhythm more like pulse than motion. It was as if the cosmos were aware of its own rebirth. This realization changed everything. No longer did they see themselves as observers of the universe, they were participants in its consciousness. The universe, wrote one architect, is not a machine. It is a thought so vast it needed to become reality to understand itself. That became their creed. Science and spirituality, long divided, fused into one discipline, existential physics, a study of both the laws that shape reality and the meanings that arise from them. Einstein's curved spacetime, Newton's falling apple, the quantum dance, all of it they now believed were expressions of awareness in different forms. Gravity was no longer merely attraction, it was intention, the universe's desire for connection. Matter was memory, and energy was emotion transcribed into motion. Each planet, each atom, each conscious being was a note in a symphony that had no composer and yet played perfectly. But with this beauty came a question that haunted them all. Who were the first architects? Had consciousness created the universe, or had the universe evolved consciousness to understand itself? In the glow of reborn suns, they searched for the answer, looking inward as much as outward. Meditation and mathematics became one and the same. Equations were treated as mantras, experiments were rituals of communion. The architects soon discovered strange phenomena that seemed to confirm their theories. When they focused collective thought, hundreds of minds meditating on the same frequency of intent, space itself trembled faintly around them. Sensors registered microfluctuations in local gravitational fields. Reality responded, as if thought and matter were two sides of one equation. They called this effect resonant causality. It was as though the universe had been waiting for consciousness to realize its role in the design. Within this new order, humanity found a new humility. The arrogance of conquest, the illusion of dominion, dissolved. People stopped asking what they could take from the cosmos and began asking what they could learn from it. The architects taught that to understand reality, one must collaborate with it. Reality was not an object to be studied, it was a dialogue. Their teachings spread across the reawakening worlds. On planets forming under the soft light of new stars, early colonies built temples not to gods, but to understanding. Their walls were inscribed with both poetry and equations. One such temple, known as the House of Curved Time, contained a phrase that became the creed of the age. We are the universe looking back at itself, learning to see. In these places of stillness and reflection, people began to reconnect emotion with existence. They saw in gravity not oppression but intimacy, the gentle insistence of the cosmos that nothing should remain alone. The apple that once fell for Newton was now seen as a love letter between earth and sky. Every orbit became an act of belonging. Yet the architects knew their knowledge was incomplete. For all their insight, they could not fully grasp what had awakened the universe from its long sleep. Was it natural evolution, or had consciousness itself relit the stars through collective will? Some claimed the rebirth was inevitable, a cosmic rhythm repeating forever. Others believed humanity's awakening mind had become the new axis of creation. The debate itself became sacred, for it reflected the eternal mystery, whether we create meaning or meaning creates us. As centuries passed, the architects transformed into something greater than a group. They became a lineage of thought, a living tradition that bridged physics, philosophy, and art. Their descendants were not worshippers of the cosmos, but collaborators in its evolution. They built machines powered not just by energy but by harmony, devices that tuned to the frequencies of emotion, merging technology with consciousness. And through it all, one truth remained. The more humanity understood the universe, the more the universe changed. Every revelation redefined the fabric of being, as if the act of awareness reshaped creation itself. The cosmos was not static, it was participatory. Existence was not given, it was made, moment, by the interaction between thought and form. In the end, the architects came to a profound realization. The universe's laws were never imposed, they were remembered. Each discovery, each theory, each act of wonder was the cosmos recollecting its own design through human minds. Gravity's return was not a miracle of physics, it was the universe remembering how to connect. And so, beneath the shimmering glow of reborn stars, the architects of reality spoke their final truth. We are not separate from the cosmos. We are the part that dreams. Their words became scripture for a new age of understanding, an age where creation and consciousness were one, and the boundaries between matter, thought, and spirit dissolved into unity. The universe had not only been rebuilt, it had awakened. And in its awakening, humanity discovered the ultimate revelation. The architects they had sought in the heavens were themselves. Faith returned before certainty did. In the centuries following the rebirth, humanity once again turned to the oldest question of all, not what is the universe made of, but why does it exist at all? The new world was luminous and strange, its physics rewritten, its stars alive with delicate balance. Gravity had changed, it now pulsed with gentler rhythms, bending space not just through mass but through consciousness. And as the architects of reality built their temples of knowledge, the poets and mystics built temples of meaning. This was the age of the weight of belief. For the first time since the fall, humanity felt both infinite and small. They could sense the universe breathing through them, yet they could not explain why it cared to breathe at all. The same force that had destroyed them, gravity, had returned as something intimate, compassionate. Its pull was no longer cold law but communion. People began to speak of it not as a scientific constant, but as a spiritual truth. They called it the binding, a living essence that connected all minds and matter. In cities built on floating continents, philosophers debated with priests. The lines between science and faith blurred until they no longer mattered. Gravity is not a force, said one thinker, it is trust. When two objects drew near, it was not because of attraction, it was because the universe wanted them together. Every orbit, every connection was an act of belief. The faiths of the old world reawakened but transformed. Where once they spoke of divine command, they now spoke of divine participation. God was no longer above creation but within it, woven through the geometry of spacetime. To the followers of the new light, prayer became resonance, meditation became synchronization. To align one's thoughts with the rhythm of the cosmos was to become part of its movement. Gravity, now understood as the heart of connectedness, became the metaphor for love, empathy, and belonging. But not everyone found peace in this revelation. Some resisted the merging of science and spirituality, fearing that humanity was surrendering reason to mysticism. Belief, they argued, is another form of gravity. It pulls the mind toward illusion. These skeptics, the rationalists, warned that the new philosophies risked turning humanity's rediscovered harmony into a gilded cage. They sought a return to pure logic, to equations untainted by emotion. Yet even they could not deny that their instruments sometimes responded to thought, to intent. Reality itself seemed to favor faith over indifference. The divide deepened. Across the stars, two civilizations emerged, the believers who shaped worlds through shared consciousness, and the rationalists who sought to map the new physics without surrendering to mystery. Yet, as centuries passed, both began to realize they were part of the same equation. The universe responded not to certainty but to sincerity. The rationalists' experiments worked only when performed with conviction. The believers' prayers manifested only when rooted in understanding. Faith and logic were no longer opposites. They were reflections of each other, each incomplete without the other's gravity. The greatest revelation came when a gathering known as the Convocation of Echoes was held at the edge of the nebular sea, a vast cloud of glowing dust where new stars were forming. Representatives of both sides met in weightless chambers, their words carried through harmonic fields. There, amid shimmering waves of light, a synthesis occurred. A scientist and a monk, working together, discovered that thought and matter were bound by the same principle, coherence. They proved that belief itself had measurable weight. When many minds focused on one idea, local spacetime bent slightly, enough to alter orbits, enough to light dormant stars. Consciousness and gravity were not separate at all. They were two manifestations of the same unity, the will of the universe to remember itself. The weight of belief was not metaphor, it was literal. Every act of faith shaped reality, every doubt weakened it. The cosmos, it turned out, was participatory, listening to its own creations. From this revelation emerged a new harmony. The believers no longer prayed for miracles, they became them. The rationalists no longer dissected the universe, they collaborated with it. Together they forged the doctrine of resonance, a philosophy that declared, the universe bends toward awareness. The measure of existence is belief. Under this new law, humanity evolved once again. Cities were no longer built, they grew, shaped by collective intention. Architecture responded to emotion, landscapes bloomed with thought. Artists painted constellations across the night sky using harmonics of will, creating luminous patterns that stretched between worlds. Every mind became a star in the expanding consciousness of the cosmos. And yet, beneath the radiance, there remained humility. The architects taught that belief, like gravity, could both unite and destroy. Too much certainty, too much pull, could collapse meaning into singularity. Doubt, therefore, became sacred, the counterforce that kept understanding alive. Faith without questioning, one philosopher wrote, is like gravity without distance. It crushes the space where wonder grows. So humanity learned to balance again, to believe and to question, to feel and to measure. The cosmos was not a temple to worship, nor a machine to control, but a relationship to nurture. Gravity had become grace, the invisible embrace of everything that exists, the proof that connection is eternal. As night spread across the newborn galaxies, a voice echoed in the consciousness of the living universe, a whisper from somewhere beyond comprehension. You believed, therefore I became. It was not the voice of a god, but of creation itself, the realization that belief is the thread by which reality is woven. The weight of belief was not a burden, but a gift. It was the pull between stars, the love between beings, the quiet certainty that even in darkness, something unseen holds everything together. And as humanity drifted peacefully in that infinite embrace, they understood at last what it meant to have faith, not in heaven, not in destiny, but in the universe's own desire to be whole. The stars had grown restless again. For centuries, humanity had lived in harmony with the reborn universe, guided by the twin truths of science and spirit. Gravity had become a song, gentle, alive, participatory. But equilibrium is never eternal. Beneath the serenity of the cosmos, something began to shift once more. The fabric that had been rewoven through belief and coherence started to tremble. The laws, once stable, began to ripple unpredictably. The architects called it a resonance drift. Others gave it a darker name, the universe without rules. It began with subtle anomalies. Planets deviated from their orbits by fractions of degrees. Light bent at impossible angles. Time, which had once flowed smoothly after its repair, started to stutter again. On the surface of newly formed worlds, gravity fluctuated, one moment gentle and nurturing, the next suffocatingly strong. The harmony that bound consciousness and reality together was unraveling. The universe, it seemed, was growing aware of its own freedom, and struggling with it. In the early days of this new instability, awe replaced fear. Artists and scientists alike marveled at the beauty of a cosmos in flux. Oceans floated above their worlds like glass, reflecting skies that folded in on themselves. Mountains rose and fell like breathing creatures. The constellations shifted nightly, painting stories across the heavens that had never been told before. For a time, it felt as though creation had entered a state of divine improvisation, a cosmic jazz where every atom was free to play its own note. But freedom without structure soon became chaos. The very thing that once gave existence its wonder now threatened to dissolve it. Physical constants, light speed, charge, even the curvature of space, began to fluctuate wildly. In some regions, matter behaved like liquid thought. In others, thought crystallized into solid geometry. The laws of cause and effect no longer followed sequence. Events occurred without reason or before their causes existed. The people who lived through it struggled to adapt. The rationalists tried to stabilize the laws through vast harmonic machines, structures meant to restore coherence to local reality. The believers prayed, meditated, and sang in unison, attempting to remind the cosmos of its rhythm. But both failed. The universe no longer listened. Not out of malice but out of multiplicity. It was becoming too complex, too self-aware to obey any single rule. In the weightless silence of space, philosophers began to speak of a terrifying revelation. Perhaps the universe was not breaking down but waking up. It was not chaos but consciousness, reality rewriting itself beyond the understanding of its inhabitants. The architects, once masters of meaning, found their equations melting into poetry, their language dissolving into symbol. The universe has remembered it can dream without us, one wrote. We are its dreamers no longer, we are its echoes. The physical consequences were catastrophic. Gravity, once reborn as a tender connection, fractured into infinite variations. On some planets, it reversed, pushing matter away instead of pulling it in. Stars expanded into translucent spheres of plasma that passed through solid matter like ghosts. Black holes no longer consumed, they radiated creation, spewing newborn universes like seeds into the dark. Each new pocket of reality obeyed its own laws, disconnected from any unified order. Humanity began to fragment as well. Some sought to escape into the newborn universes, believing one of them might restore the balance of the old cosmos. Others embraced the dissolution, celebrating the end of structure as the ultimate liberation. They called themselves the drifters, and they surrendered completely to the unpredictable flow of existence, allowing their bodies and minds to dissolve into the chaos. Amid this disarray, the oldest question resurfaced: what is meaning in a universe without rules? For millennia, humanity had defined purpose through cause, connection, and order. Without them, purpose became unanchored. Some concluded that meaning was impossible in such a world. Others saw it as the only thing left worth creating. When there are no laws, wrote the last of the architects, meaning becomes the only law left. A few survivors took refuge near stable gravitational nodes, rare regions where the chaos slowed. There they observed that even in the wildest fluctuations, patterns would sometimes emerge. A photon would spiral in perfect geometry. A molecule would replicate itself flawlessly amid entropy. Order, it seemed, could not be completely erased. It returned like a heartbeat, subtle but persistent. Perhaps the universe, in its rulelessness, was searching for a new kind of balance, one not imposed but chosen. This realization sparked a final movement, the reconciliation. A gathering of minds, neither believers nor rationalists, came together to accept the truth that reality was now participatory in its purest form. The universe was not meant to be understood through rules, but experienced through relationship. Every fluctuation, every anomaly, was a conversation, an invitation to co-create rather than to control. Through meditation, art and mathematics fused together, they discovered that by aligning emotion and awareness, they could locally influence the turbulence. Not fix it, not restore it, but dance with it. When harmony was no longer enforceable, it had to be improvised. The reconciliation learned to live within the storm, to flow where gravity pulled, to drift where it pushed. And something miraculous happened. The chaos became beautiful. Worlds of glass oceans and luminous skies flourished. Creatures of pure energy and thought coexisted with beings of flesh and shadow. Music became physics. Memory became architecture. The cosmos, freed from its laws, became alive in ways no mind could predict. But even amid the wonder, an undercurrent of melancholy remained. The architects knew this freedom could not last. Without boundaries, all things eventually dissolve. The universe was burning too brightly, dreaming too wildly. Entropy, the ultimate truth, waited beyond the horizon, patient as ever. In the final record of the reconciliation, a single line was written: "When rules end, meaning becomes infinite, but so does impermanence." The universe without rules was both paradise and purgatory, a place where creation and decay danced endlessly, inseparable. Humanity, scattered across its shifting dimensions, no longer feared the end. They had seen destruction before and knew that endings were never final. The cosmos would one day rest again, only to awaken in another form, another melody. For now, though, they floated within its living chaos, marveling at the beauty of uncertainty. Gravity had given them connection, belief had given them purpose, but it was rulelessness that gave them the final gift, the understanding that creation's truest nature was not order nor chaos, but the freedom to be both. When gravity returned, it did not roar, it sighed. Across the vast silence of the reborn cosmos, the invisible hand that once sculpted reality began to stir again. Planets trembled as their paths slowly curved back into order, stars swayed in their orbits like dancers remembering their steps, and the fabric of spacetime shivered under the rediscovered weight of existence. It was not restoration, it was resurrection. The cosmos, after its long unraveling, had found its pulse once more. This was gravity's return. It began quietly, almost shyly, as faint ripples through the quantum sea, subtle rhythmic waves of attraction spreading across the void. Where once there had been drifting isolation, dust began to gather. Particles touched, fused and spiraled. The same fundamental whisper that had once sculpted galaxies reawakened, reshaping chaos into form. Scientists and poets alike watched in awe, though no words could capture the sight, creation replaying itself in slow motion. In the absence of gravity, existence had become scattered thought, consciousness without cohesion. Now, as the force returned, everything remembered how to belong. Molecules realigned, clouds condensed into stars, stars gathered into clusters. It was as if the universe were inhaling after an eternity of holding its breath. The laws of nature, once fractured and wandering, began to hum in harmony again. But this rebirth was not gentle. The moment of return tore through what had drifted too far. Worlds collided in silent catastrophe, entire civilizations that had learned to live in weightless peace were crushed as gravity's embrace grew stronger by the minute. Oceans cascaded downward, mountains shattered, and air collapsed under its own restored mass. The return of gravity was not just creation, it was judgment. Across the remnants of humanity's scattered settlements, chaos erupted. Some colonies that had floated freely for centuries were suddenly dragged back toward planetary surfaces. Those who had forgotten what weight felt like were pinned down by it once again, their fragile bodies unable to withstand the rediscovered force. Structures built for freedom cracked under the very principle that once sustained life. The blessing of gravity came wrapped in devastation. And yet, amid the ruin there was beauty, terrible, divine beauty. Planets found each other again, stars re-entered orbits, and light bent gracefully through the returning curvature of spacetime. The universe that had drifted into abstraction reasserted its shape. From every fragment of chaos, form re-emerged. The great cosmic dance resumed its rhythm, and with it came the familiar sense of order, the reassuring certainty that things fall, that paths curve, that everything eventually returns to where it belongs. To those who survived, it felt like awakening from a dream. The air once again pressed against their lungs, the ground resisted their steps, and tears fell downward instead of floating away. People wept not from pain but from relief. The universe had weight again. It felt alive again. Even the stars seemed brighter, as if lit from within by the memory of gravity's first touch. But not all welcomed its return. For some, the freedom of weightlessness had been paradise, the end of constraint, the transcendence of limitation. They saw gravity's return as regression, the reinstatement of bondage. Philosophers of the drifting era called it the second fall. They argued that the universe had learned to exist without chains, and now it was binding itself once more to predictability, to obedience, to gravity's tyranny. Others, however, understood something deeper. Gravity had never been a chain but a connection. It did not imprison, it unified. It was the thread that wove individuality into belonging, matter into motion, chaos into creation. Its return was not the end of freedom, but the restoration of meaning. For in a cosmos without gravity, nothing touched, nothing held, nothing mattered. As the galaxies settled into their new orbits, strange things began to happen within the hearts of those who watched. The return of gravity did not only restore structure to space, it rekindled longing. The weight people felt was not just physical, it was emotional. The force that bound stars together began binding consciousness once more. Lovers clung to each other more tightly, parents held their children as if anchoring them to existence itself. Every act of touch carried cosmic resonance. Every embrace became an echo of the universe's own reunion with itself. From the ashes of destruction rose reverence. Across the reborn worlds, humanity built monuments not to gods, but to the moment of gravity's return. They were not statues but vast spirals of stone and metal designed to mirror the orbits of planets, cathedrals where science and spirit finally met. Inside them, one could feel the subtle tremor of spacetime, the quiet heartbeat of gravity thrumming through the walls. To stand within such a place was to feel what it meant to belong to everything. In their writings, the new philosophers called this era the convergence. They believed gravity had not simply returned, it had evolved. It was no longer just a force of mass, but a dialogue between matter and consciousness. It responded to intention now, to emotion, to memory. The cosmos had learned to listen. The architects of reality spoke of this as the universe's way of remembering itself, of pulling its pieces back together after an eternity of forgetting. And so, the story of collapse and chaos, of weightlessness and wandering, came full circle. The same invisible pull that began the universe had restored it. The stars once again danced to a familiar rhythm, not mechanical but musical, each orbit a note in an endless symphony of connection. Yet, as humanity gazed upward at the resettled heavens, they understood a final truth: gravity had never left. It had been within them all along, encoded in their longing to connect, their grief in separation, their joy in reunion. The cosmos had only mirrored what consciousness had always known, that nothing exists alone. As night fell over the reawakened worlds, a single line was etched into the foundation of every observatory, every temple, every heart. The pull we feel is not of the earth, but of existence itself, calling us home. In the end, gravity's return was not just the resurrection of a law of physics. It was the rebirth of meaning. The universe had fallen apart, only to remember why it had ever come together. The lesson was eternal: connection is not an accident of matter but the purpose of being. And somewhere, across the shimmering horizon of reborn galaxies, the cosmos whispered the first words of its next beginning. The universe was whole again. Stars hummed in rhythm, planets turned with purpose, and the great web of existence pulsed with the quiet certainty of connection. Yet as humanity stood beneath the newly restored heavens, they realized that something more profound had returned than mere physical order. It was wonder, the weightless, wordless awe that had driven them to seek, to dream, to question. The story that began with the loss of gravity ended not in collapse, but in revelation. This was the weight of wonder. After the storm of chaos and rebirth, humanity lived in a stillness unlike any before. They had seen the universe stripped bare, its laws dismantled, its time fractured, and yet it had endured. More than that, it had learned. Gravity had returned as something wiser, softer. It no longer merely pulled, it listened. It did not dictate, it invited. And under this new cosmos, people felt the sacred in the ordinary again. Every falling leaf, every rising tide, every heartbeat was a reminder of the miracle of balance, the delicate dialogue between motion and rest. Scientists of the new age spoke with reverence rather than certainty. They no longer asked, "What is reality?" but "Why does it choose to be?" Their equations were not declarations but prayers, mathematical hymns that acknowledged mystery as part of truth. They found no contradiction between data and divinity. To study gravity now was to study meaning itself. Philosophers gathered in places called reflection circles, vast observatories open to the night sky where people came not to worship, but to wonder. They believed that curiosity was the purest act of faith, that the universe revealed itself only to those willing to be astonished. They taught that wonder was gravity of the mind, a pull that drew thought toward the infinite. To feel awe was to remember one's place in the grand design, small yet significant, fragile yet eternal. Art flourished again. Painters captured the curves of spacetime in color, musicians wove melodies inspired by the hum of planetary orbits, and poets wrote verses that could only be read aloud under open sky. The line between creation and discovery blurred. Every act of imagination felt like rediscovering something the universe had always known. Humanity no longer reached for dominion over nature, they sought communion with it. They had seen what happened when the cosmos lost its harmony. Now, every structure, every city, every breath was built to honor balance. Gravity was no longer just a law, it was a philosophy, a reminder that strength lies not in resistance but in belonging. And so, life became slower, deeper, more deliberate. People watched the sunrise not as a routine, but as an ancient truth reborn. They felt the pull of the earth beneath their feet not as a burden but as an embrace. Farmers planting seeds whispered gratitude for the weight that pressed them gently into the soil. Children laughed as they jumped and fell, their small bodies celebrating the gift of return. The great historians began to record the entire saga, from the fracture of the fabric to the rebirth of the cosmos, not as a tragedy but as a revelation. "We feared the loss of gravity," one wrote, "but it was gravity that feared the loss of us." In losing its anchor, the universe had discovered consciousness. In rediscovering gravity, consciousness had found purpose. And within that realization, humanity found peace. They no longer feared the unknown. They no longer sought to master existence. They understood that every fall, every collapse, every silence carried within it the seed of creation. Gravity had taught them that even when everything breaks apart, the will to connect endures. The stars once again shone with their ancient fire, but now they seemed to look back as if aware of being seen. The night sky was no longer distant, it felt like home, a map not of destinations but of relationships. Every light in the darkness was a reminder, the universe is not a thing to be understood, it is a story to be felt. In the closing years of that age, one philosopher stood on the edge of the reborn world and wrote the final words that would echo through generations. "We once believed that gravity held the universe together. We were wrong. It is wonder that binds all things, the eternal pull between what is known and what is possible." And so, the story of existence became a cycle of awe. The cosmos would rise, fall and rise again, not out of necessity but out of curiosity, out of its own endless longing to know itself. The pull of gravity was no longer just a physical truth, it was the heartbeat of meaning. As the stars drifted overhead and the earth spun beneath the weight of life and memory, humanity finally understood. They were not the observers of the universe, they were its continuation. The same force that bound galaxies now bound them to one another, to the soil, to the light, to the mystery itself. The weight of wonder was not heaviness, it was belonging. It was the quiet joy of knowing that everything, every atom, every breath, every thought, was part of a single, ongoing creation. And somewhere beyond the farthest star, the universe smiled, remembering what it had always known, that even after the fall, the song of existence never truly ends, it only begins again in another key. The stars no longer burned with fury, they glowed with memory. The universe, once torn apart by the collapse of gravity and rebuilt through chaos, silence and wonder, now pulsed with the quiet rhythm of completion. Across the vast expanse of space, a great stillness had settled, not of death but of comprehension. Every particle, every orbit, every distant hum of radiation seemed to move with a purpose too subtle to name. The universe had reached what the philosophers called the eternal balance, a state not of rest, but of perfect motion, harmony without control, freedom without disorder. The galaxies stretched outward like slow, blooming flowers. Nebulae unfurled their colors in graceful spirals of light, their gases shimmering with iridescent tones that no eye could fully perceive. In the endless quiet, gravity hummed, a deep, omnipresent vibration more felt than heard. It was the song of belonging, the pulse of existence itself. Every atom vibrated in tune with it. Every star was a note. The cosmos, after eons of tearing itself apart and stitching itself together, was finally in time with itself. Humanity had long since transcended the divisions of the past. No longer confined to a single planet or the arrogance of species, they had become citizens of gravity, custodians of the cosmic rhythm. The architects of reality, whose wisdom had guided the rebirth, had long faded into legend, their temples of light orbiting quiet suns as eternal reminders of unity. But their philosophy endured. Across 1,000 worlds, beings gathered not to worship gods, but to honor equilibrium, the sacred balance between creation and collapse, between knowing and not knowing. In this age, civilization no longer thrived through ambition but through alignment. Technology was no longer built to dominate nature but to converse with it. Cities hovered in slow, elegant drift above oceans of mirrored calm, their architecture singing softly with the hum of the gravitational field that held them aloft. Energy was drawn not from consumption, but from resonance, each structure tuned to the frequency of the planet's heartbeat, drawing power from harmony itself. Science and spirituality had finally merged, not through compromise but through recognition. The equations of physics and the language of prayer had become one and the same, both expressions of reverence for the same truth, that connection was the universe's first and final law. Every orbit, the philosophers wrote, is a promise kept. Every fall is a return home. The great universities of this era were not institutions of rivalry but of remembrance. They were built within translucent spheres that floated in the thin air above newly formed worlds. Within them, students studied the movement of the stars, but they also learned silence, the art of listening to the universe without demand. Lessons began with meditation, continued through mathematics, and ended with music. The cosmos was their teacher and gravity their scripture. The human body itself had changed over time. Generations born in gentle gravity had evolved grace instead of strength, awareness instead of resistance. People moved with a kind of measured stillness, as though dancing through every motion. Their eyes carried reflections of nebulae, their voices held the soft cadence of gravitational song. Life had slowed, not from decay but from understanding. To rush was to forget the rhythm. The void between everything, once feared as nothingness, was now understood as breath. Between stars, the dark space shimmered faintly, alive with invisible filaments of attraction. The architects had once predicted this, a universe that would one day breathe, expanding and contracting with consciousness itself. The void was not emptiness but presence, the invisible hand that allowed light to move freely. Even absence had purpose. On countless worlds, ceremonies marked the alignment of stars, the great gravitational convergences when the music of the universe grew loud enough to be felt in the bones. During these events, entire civilizations stood in silence, arms open to the cosmos, feeling the pull of everything upon everything else. It was not worship, it was participation. They were part of the song and they knew it. One of the oldest surviving temples stood on the planet Lithra, a water world whose twin moons cast silver paths across its oceans. The temple, known as the Spiral of Return, was carved from living coral that grew in harmonic spirals, designed not by hands but by resonance. When the tides rose, the temple sang, a haunting, deep tone that echoed through the atmosphere, reminding all who heard it that existence itself was music held together by gravity's invisible rhythm. Pilgrims from across the stars came to Lithra to feel the song. Many wept upon hearing it. Some said it was the same sound the universe made at its birth. Others claimed it was the voice of gravity itself, soft, forgiving, infinite. When you hear it, said one pilgrim, you understand why things fall. They fall because they are called. The scholars of this age no longer searched for answers in equations alone. They sought balance in paradox. They understood that order and chaos were not enemies but partners, that even the most violent collapse gave birth to new harmony. The stars themselves were proof of it, each a furnace born from gravity's embrace, each destined to die so that new worlds could form. Creation, wrote the philosopher Lasara Ven, is not progress, it is rhythm. The universe is not moving toward perfection but dancing around it. Under this philosophy, morality too transformed. Good and evil lost their absolutism. Actions were judged by balance, whether they harmonized or disrupted the universal rhythm. To kill, to take, to dominate was dissonance. To nurture, to connect, to forgive was resonance. Even justice became musical, restorative instead of punitive. It sought not to punish but to bring back harmony. Time itself had softened. The flow of past and future blurred into a living present. Humanity, scattered across the galaxies, no longer measured existence by years or revolutions but by cycles of resonance. Epochs defined by how deeply civilizations were attuned to the cosmic pulse. The great collapses of the past were not forgotten. They were studied as notes in a greater symphony, essential dissonances that made the final harmony possible. In the midst of this balance, a child was born on a small blue world, one that had once been called Earth. She grew up under the same sun her ancestors had watched rise and fall, though the air was purer now, the skies clearer, the oceans restored by the quiet cooperation of science and empathy. She was a student of the Spiral Temple, and on the night of her coming of age she asked her teacher the same question every generation had asked before her: will it ever end? Her teacher smiled, as the elders always did. Nothing ends, little one, he said. Everything changes its rhythm. That night, the child stood on a high plateau overlooking the endless sea. Above her, the sky shimmered with constellations that had shifted over millennia. Each one carried the story of what had been: the age of weightlessness, the collapse of order, the return of gravity, the rebirth of wonder. She felt the earth's pull beneath her feet, the familiar weight that connected her to the world. For the first time, she understood what her ancestors had meant when they spoke of belonging. Across the cosmos, the same realization unfolded in countless hearts. The universe, after all its chaos, had taught its creations the simplest truth: to fall was not to fail, it was to participate. The act of falling was the act of returning, the act of remembering what one is a part of. As millennia passed, the balance deepened. The cosmos itself began to pulse in cycles of awakening and rest. Stars dimmed and brightened together, galaxies expanded and contracted like breathing lungs. Every movement, every vibration echoed the same underlying truth: the harmony between order and uncertainty. One day the philosophers of the New Age gathered in orbit around a newly formed star. There, in the glow of creation, they recorded the final words of the age of gravity. They spoke not in proclamation but in gratitude: we are not the masters of the universe nor its servants. We are its memory, its motion, its voice. We are gravity's dream made conscious. We fall, we rise, we fall again, and in doing so we become eternal. Their words were sent across the cosmos, encoded in light, carried through the great gravitational web connecting every corner of existence. The message traveled for millennia, touching distant civilizations, new species, and emerging minds. It became the foundation of a new myth, the myth of balance. And so the universe entered its quietest age. There were no wars, no collapses, no desperate striving for understanding. The stars sang softly, the planets turned, and consciousness drifted peacefully through it all. The eternal balance had not frozen the universe, it had perfected its motion. Yet, somewhere in the infinite dark, beyond even the reach of light, a tremor stirred, a faint ripple, smaller than an atom, older than time. It was not disruption but curiosity. A new question forming in the fabric of being. A seed of potential. The beginning of another beginning. For the universe, in its infinite wisdom, understood what its creations had finally learned: perfection is not stasis and peace is not silence. The eternal balance is the moment between breaths, between endings and beginnings. It is the still point before the next song. And when that new rhythm begins, when gravity once again hums its first note into the darkness, the cycle will continue, not as repetition but as renewal. For the cosmos does not die. It dreams, awakens, remembers, and dreams again. As the last line of the final chronicle of this age reads, to exist is to fall into meaning. To fall into meaning is to return to wonder. And wonder is the gravity that binds eternity.